Hola, and welcome to Vive Nutrition Radio, the first ever Spanglish podcast where you will hear interviews with the top minds in nutrition, performance, fitness, and health in both English and Spanish. Here is your host, expert registered dietitian, Andres Ayesta, on a mission to help you take your nutrition to the next level. Hope you're ready for this. Let's dive right in.
So today's podcast was phenomenal. I had the opportunity to interview GaryVee's former personal trainer, and his name is Jordan Syatt. And of course, a lot of people know him through that bit of. But if you do a quick Google search on him, you'll find that he has a pretty big follow on Instagram, and he puts out amazing content. And I had the opportunity to interview him and to kind of chat a little bit more about him and, you know, his trajectory and his history and kind of like what he does now and his thoughts on dieting, nutrition, weight loss. He does have a lot of like background on health and behavioral changes and behavioral coaching. So I think it was really impactful. Some of like the things that Jordan and I had an opportunity to discuss, but just so you can have a little more information about him. So I'll share some of his like fun facts and this literally quote from some of the stuff on his website. He is at 5 times world record powerlifter. He used to be a wrestler, and you're going to hear that in his story. He's also a precision nutrition and Westside Barbell certified coach. He does have a Bachelors of Science in health and behavior science with a focus on strength and conditioning. He was, as I mentioned, Gary Vaynerchuk's personal trainer and strength and nutrition coach. 27th degree black belt in chugging coffee, as he also puts it out. He does travels quite often. And like I said, he does have a pretty big follow on his YouTube and social media where he puts out a lot of content trying to kind of bust a lot of myths around nutrition, weight loss, fat loss, and dieting. And it's actually where we center our conversation around. So just so you have an idea of what this podcast is going to be about. So Jordan shared his story today. He kind of like explained a little bit more about the background behind like his online nutrition coaching business and how he started, how he went to Israel and got called by GaryVee's office to go and interview to work with him. And we also got deep into his Big Mac challenge. So this is actually something that he did by the time that we're publishing this podcast. He did it a couple months ago. And just to prove the point that you can include foods, and foods are not inherently good or bad for you, but it all depends on many of the different factors to be able to achieve results. And he kind of like went on and in detail into exactly what he did. So I will stop talking right now and we'll let you listen to this podcast because it was definitely full of value, and hopefully you'll find it helpful for you and your journey. So whether you're a nutrition coach or dietitian, he shares some like things from the perspective of a coach, but also if you're just listening to this because you're your consumer trying to learn and improve your knowledge of nutrition, this is certainly an episode that you don't want to miss. So without further ado, here's Jordan Syatt in Vive Nutrition Radio. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Vive Nutrition Radio. I'm extremely excited to have my podcast guest here today because you may have heard of him, and as one of his previous challenges in the past that he's ever done. But right now, you may know him because he has been doing, or did by the time the recording of this podcast, what is known as the Big Mac Challenge, and he's going to delight us with his experience doing this. But I wanted to welcome you, Jordan Syatt, into the show. What's going on, man?
What's up, man? Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. So I guess like the first thing I always like to start this podcast with is hearing people's stories, man. So tell us a little bit, and I know you're a little bit of your background because I kind of like read through it and I've seen it on your social media. But where did the whole entire story started for Jordan Syatt, from like the whole fitness perspective? I know, are you originally from New York? What's the story behind you?
Well, yeah. So actually, I grew up in Boston.
Interesting.
I grew up in Boston, and I got into fitness because I was a wrestler. So I wrestled from the time I was 8 years old, and basically my life was just wrestling. And by the time I got to middle school and high school, it was like wrestling and girls, was all I thought about. And I made varsity as a freshman in high school. I beat out a junior for the spot. and I had to cut from 112 pounds to 103 pounds every week for competition. And I mean, most people don't know how to lose weight, period. But like when you're a high school kid and you have to cut weight, have to make weight for competition, you're going to do really stupid things. So like, I was a good wrestler from a technique perspective, from a endurance perspective, but a 13, 14-year-old kid going up against like the 17, 18-year-old kids, my strength wasn't there. So I basically had to figure out how am I going to cut weight and get stronger at the same time. And fortunately, I was smart enough to contact a gym near me just to say, hey, like, can you help me? Can I learn from you? I'll take the trash out. I'll clean the floors. I just want to learn how to do this. And even more fortunately, it was a gym that was actually very much rooted in science, and they were very, very helpful. And they took me in, and I actually started just interning there from the time I was 14, and ended up working there all through high school. And I became obsessed with it, with coaching, with strength training and nutrition. And then from there, after high school, I really got into powerlifting and competed in powerlifting for a while. And then in college, I just sort of started documenting what I was doing online. I was writing blogs and making videos, not with any intent to start a fitness business, more just to show people what I was doing fitness wise. And that was in like 2011, 2012. And people just started asking me like, hey, could you do my programs, do this? And I didn't even charge people because I didn't know you could charge people online. And then eventually, like when I graduated college, I had an online coaching business that was like working pretty well, and moved to Israel for a little bit. Then I got contacted by Gary Vaynerchuk's team, and they asked me if I would be willing to move to New York to coach Gary. So I moved from Israel to New York a little over 3 years ago to coach Gary, and now here we are.
Nice, dude. That's insane. And I know, like you mentioned, like the biggest part, because there's so many different highlights in there that I like to kind of like go into and ask you more questions about. But obviously, from wrestling to now powerlifting and kind of getting into this, and I think one of some of your fun facts is like you're a 5-time world record holder for powerlifting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That is insane, dude. And how tall are you? I'm just curious about that because I've been seeing kind of like, and my fiance was asking me yesterday, it's like, how tall is he? Because I'm just trying to figure out, for his weight and everything. So I was just curious.
Yeah. No, a lot of people see my weight. They're like, "Whoa, what the fuck?" So I'm 5'4". I'm like a short, stocky wrestler. So
okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
I was just like, I think a lot of people were kind of like curious about that, but that's awesome, dude. So tell me, like, so from Israel, and I think one of the areas I definitely wanted to ask you about, like, because I was actually looking through your YouTube channel and like some like your older YouTubes, and it goes back to like I think 2012. I don't think I knew what YouTube was back then. And I was dude, and then like I can look at those videos and then obviously this also speaks because there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast that are also like either dietitians, nutrition coaches, and they don't understand the grind and where people start. Like, they look at you and they look at, your Instagram, they're like, oh, this guy has it made. Like, like look at his content, it's amazing. But they never seen actually what it was like in the past. Like, and like, this is like you, like, I think one of the videos I watch you is like, you in like a gym, like, a bunch of people working out in the back. And it's like, hey, this is like Jordan Syatt. I'm here just kind of like, to kind of teach you how to do certain things and all that. So I think it's obviously kind of like talks a lot more about progression and how people go from point A to point B, which is actually where you're at today. So that's pretty cool, man. So so how come you moved to Israel? Like, what was like, is that something more of like, a personal thing that you did or was it more like work related or something?
Well, yeah, basically I'm Jewish, and I went to Israel when I was 16 for the first time, just like on a youth trip, and I fell in love with it. And, I was I wasn't a good student at all. I was not a good student. I hated school. My like brain just like wasn't good for sitting in class for long periods of time. I wasn't a good test taker. And by the time it came to go to college, I was like, I have no interest in going to college whatsoever. Like, that is the last thing I want to do right now. And so I was fortunate enough that like my mom not like supported me in going to Israel for a year, basically to do volunteering and to just like go there and not just do nothing, but like I volunteered with Holocaust survivors and I volunteered all over the country. I went there for a year, and then after that gap year, I was ready to go to school. I was older. I was a little bit more mature. And then but I loved it. Like Israel was like the best place in the world for me. It was like super relaxed, very calm. I felt at home there. So after college, when I had everything online and I could do that wherever there was Wi-Fi, I was like, why not go back? And so I just ended up moving back for a while.
Oh, okay. So you went for a little while, like when you were younger, and then you decided to go back and just do, because I'm guessing you were still doing like the online thing whenever you were in Israel, like, the second time that you went. Is that how like GaryVee kind of found you?
Well, yeah. So basically, I started writing articles in 2011 on my blog. But again, like I had no idea it was going to be a business. I was just writing articles, hopefully to help people. And it turned out that in 2012, there was a random dude who was reading my articles and he left a comment on them, and I responded and I replied, I answered his questions. And that random dude, who I didn't know who he was, 4 years later became Gary Vaynerchuk's personal trainer. And when his contract was up, Gary was like, who's going to coach me now? And he recommended me.
Wow. Small world, huh?
Very. You never know who you're interacting with. You never know what it was. It's funny because I always say that one article to date is one of my least popular articles. Like very few people have read it. It was one of my first articles. It was one of my, like, I think my least informative articles. But a random kid found it and he enjoyed it and he asked a question and I responded to his comment. And like 3-4 years later, he became Gary Vaynerchuk's coach. He wasn't even a personal trainer at the time. Like he was an accountant and later became a personal trainer. And you just never know. You never know who you're going to meet.
And what was your reaction then, dude? Like when you got that call and like, hey, we're like, calling for like GaryVee's office and we would like you to, interview you for like the position to actually like be GaryVee's personal trainer. What was that reaction like? Or like, what was going through your head at that point?
Well, I mean, it was a long process. Like it was like a longer process where like basically I had to fly to New York to do an interview, more or less. I flew from Tel Aviv to New York to coach Gary for an hour. And that was very surreal. And it was one of those things where I'm like, about different things, I get pretty superstitious. So I didn't tell anybody. Like I told none of my friends in Israel, none of my parents, none of my like family, nothing. I was like, nobody knew that I was even leaving Israel. No one knew what I was doing. And I flew to New York and I was there for less than 30 hours. And wow. Coach Gary came back. I remember I walked back into my apartment back in Tel Aviv and my roommate was just like, yo, what's up, man? Like he didn't even think I left the country. And I didn't tell anybody until about a month and a half later when they finally offered me the job. And I was like, holy shit, like I can't believe this. And then as soon as they offered me the job, I moved back to New York within a week. So that was it. It was a long drawn out process that took several months, but it was surreal the whole way through.
And I know you worked with him for a while because I think I saw one of your recent videos that you posted on YouTube talking about, how you finally kind of like got to the end of, your journey with GaryVee. And I guess like, just not to get too much into the details of like, what it was like and all that, like what was like your biggest kind of learning or like the biggest lessons that you got and like the biggest takeaways that you got from obviously coaching somebody at such a high level and so kind of like close and develop such a close relationship to it, and somebody that is like as driven and as as big as he has become so far. Like what was some of like the biggest lessons that that you could maybe share with the audience and from your experience working with them?
I think one that is probably going to hit home with your audience, and you actually sort of mentioned it a few minutes ago, is just the outrageous value of hard work, but in a different sense than I think a lot of coaches and nutritionists and RDs even think of. Obviously, coaches and nutritionists and all of us, like we work very hard in our field. We work very hard to go through school. We work very hard to better ourselves. We work very hard with continuing education. But I think an area in which they lack work ethic is in terms of promoting themselves and promoting their knowledge online for free. And a lot of people will go to my Instagram or go to my YouTube or whatever, and they'll just be like, oh man, like, man, either he has it made or like, oh man, it just must be cool to like have like that type of a platform. But they don't understand how fucking hard I work to make that happen. And I know a lot of coaches and a lot of nutritionists and whoever, like a lot of times they either get upset at the notion of possibly giving away stuff for free. And I think this is a lot of times from bad business advice. People are like, never undervalue your services, never offer stuff for free. It's like, that's a stupid idea, number one. Number two is, if you put out more free content on a daily basis, on a very regular basis, the more you put out, the more opportunities you will have to help people all over the world. And every coach I know, every nutritionist I know, every RD I know, everyone, their main goal is always to help people. I think that's one of the things that can often make social media and business harder for them, because they really just want to help people. But they don't understand that if you work really unbelievably hard at putting out content on social media, then you'll be able to help way more people than if you only do what you're doing right now. And that's not to say if you're only working with people one-on-one, it's bad. It's a blessing. It's incredible. It's extraordinary. And if that's what you want to do, that's amazing. But don't look at what someone else is doing on social media and just be like, oh, it must be nice to have that, and then complain that you don't have it, because you could have it if you just put in the work. It's one of those things where a lot of nutritionists or personal trainers, they will they'll say, oh, I would love to do social media, but I'm not good at it, or they'll do it for a week and complain that they don't have 1 million followers all of a sudden. It's like, you tell your clients to eat fruits and vegetables every day. You tell your clients to drink water every day. You tell your clients to be consistent, even and especially when they don't want to be consistent. But all of a sudden, you expect to have like all of this outrageous progress on social media in such a very short period of time. It's like, it takes time and an outrageous amount of effort, even and especially when you don't want to do it.
Yeah, dude. And I think I think we could probably like relate that to like any kind of setting, like us and me also in like my journey as a dietitian, growing an online coaching business. And also for somebody that comes to us for weight loss advice, which I think I like to call it comparison syndrome, which is always kind of comparing yourself to that person that has more followers, that person that gets more likes, that person that gets more, better results when you're like kind of like looking at the weight loss kind of process, and obviously not understanding, okay, what does it really take to get to that point? What did that person do to get to that point? And it just kind of like looking at what we call like, in social media, the highlight reel, like this is what life looks like right now. But then there's a lot of times like the behind the scenes, which a lot of times, like I think like you also show in some way, shape or form, like how hard, all the work and all the hours that you put into, towards like doing that kind of stuff. So I think that comparison syndrome, I think it's like a lot of people suffering from that a lot, because they're just trying to figure out, how can I be that person? What can I do to actually get to that point like that person did, without understanding exactly what he took? So
100%. Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's a cliche saying like comparison is the thief of joy. And we all know it and we all like understand it, but very rarely do we actually live it and make a conscious devoted effort to stop it. One of my favorite sayings is like, don't compare like your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 15. But I also that wasn't my saying, but from that, I always said like, don't compare your chapter 15 to someone else's chapter 15. Like, it doesn't fucking matter, because it's a different book. Like, yep. It's an entirely different book. Like, you can't be comparing yourself to anybody else in any way, shape or form, because it never does anything good. Like comparing yourself to someone else, there is zero positive that comes from it. It's always comparing yourself to an entirely different situation, a different person. Like, you probably don't want to be that person. You might like certain aspects of what that person has, but that has nothing to do with what you're doing. And I think that comparing yourself in any way, shape or form is only going to lead down a path of negativity and pessimism, when in reality, if you stop comparing and start looking at what you can do, then you start walking down a more optimistic and positive path.
Yeah, man. That's powerful. And I think like that, like I said, comparison is always like, like kind of like you said, that thief of joy, but then again, it's comparing yourself to other people. It's like, like a different book. So now what I guess like asking more specifically about like, the hard work that you put in towards to become the Jordan Syatt that you're in today. I'm always curious to ask people, what does a day in the life look like for you? Because I know you put it out a lot on your stories, and kind of like shows a little bits and pieces of it. But what does a day in the life look like for you? What are like your typical routines? And I know right now, like probably it's going to be closer to 11 o'clock, so I'm sure you're going to leave pretty soon to go get that Big Mac. But what does like a day in the life look like for Jordan Syatt?
Man, well, I will say my schedule is pretty, it's pretty all over the place. Like I don't really have one definitive schedule. I do travel a fair amount. But I would say usually I'm up anywhere between like 5 to 7 a.m. depending on the day. And then from there, it's funny. I didn't even really think about this until I think yesterday, my videographer Rico mentioned this. I don't intermittent fast, like oftentimes deliberately off. Usually it's just because I'll wake up, I'm not hungry, coffee, water, tea until anywhere between like 9 to 11 a.m. Then I'll usually have my first meal. It's not the Big Mac. I learned that on the first day of the challenge. I had the Big Mac before I worked out on the first day, and that was a very poor decision. And then it's usually a lighter meal, Greek yogurt with fruit, something along those lines, maybe some Greek yogurt with oatmeal. And then I'll work out. And then from there, usually like all this time and space in between, like waking up, going to work out, my first meal, it's content. It's like that is the vast majority of my day is making content or interacting with people on various social media platforms, answering DMs, answering comments, making content, writing a caption. A lot of people, I think this is what a lot of people really misunderestimate or they underestimate about social media is they'll go on, they'll make a post and they'll write a caption really quick and the whole thing might take them 10, 15 minutes. One Instagram post for me can easily take 3 hours, like easily. That's like probably more of an average from start to finish in terms of the caption, like thinking of the content, making the actual content, whether it's the video or the image, and then the caption as well. Like 3 hours per post is probably an accurate estimate. And that's what I'm doing. A lot of my day is making a number of those, doing YouTube videos, Instagram. Like a lot of times what I'll do is a lot of my Instagram and YouTube content comes from my Twitter content. And I use Twitter as a gauge to see like what people are enjoying, what they're interacting with. And if it does well on Twitter, it usually does well on Instagram, and then it usually does well on YouTube. So sometimes I'll just go on Twitter and I'll just tweet for an hour straight, just different things, just see what people are reacting to. And then I'll gauge that for what content I want to make down the road. So a lot of it's just content creation, content, like coming up with like what ideas people are actually hitting home with, answering questions. That's what I do a lot of times in like Q&As on Instagram. Just answering questions, seeing what people are interested in, seeing what the most common questions are. And, then obviously I work with some one-on-one clients. I mainly have my inner circle, which is a much lower cost opportunity for people to come in and get workouts from me, nutrition guidelines from me, have a group community and accountability and support. So I spend a lot of time in there and creating content for them. But that's probably like my general day-to-day is just a lot of content and a lot of interaction with the people who follow me. And I think people, they feel that I'm spending a lot of time with them. And that's one of the reasons why they enjoy it and they like interacting with me.
And I think a lot of times, like people get a little bit consumed, like, and I agree with you. Like a lot of times people underestimate the time it takes to create quick quality content. And then they think like, oh, it's going to take me 2 hours. It's just too much time. It was like, it takes 2 hours to get, to create something that can create impact to even one person, then, it's worth every single minute of it. Now for you, like, how do you, like, I guess a good question for you is like, how do you create balance between like, cause creating content for you and for some people, social media is kind of like the leisure. For you is obviously kind of part of your life, is your job, is your work too. How do you create balance between that and your personal life? Do you have like specific like times where you're like, I'm going to shut off, like I'm going to completely, fall off like, social media, or this is more kind of like an ongoing type of thing for you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So basically in the same way that I always try and make fat loss as realistic as possible. Like people say, I'll never say fat loss is easy. I'll never say like, I'll always be like, listen, if you're losing fat, you're going to be hungry sometimes. Like that's okay. That you have to understand that you're not always going to be comfortable. I sort of do the same thing with this. Like I don't have much balance, to be very frank with you. My life is not necessarily a quote unquote balanced life at all. I'm very focused on what I do. I'm very focused on my business. I have a girlfriend. I think I have a very serious girlfriend. This is a girl I'm going to marry for sure. I think like one of the reasons I'm able to have an unbalanced life is because I've surrounded myself with people who support what I do, and they know this is what I love, and they don't guilt me for it. They don't shame me for it. They don't like try and get me to do something else because they're insecure. Like they absolutely support me 100%. And that allows me to do what I love, which then allows me to have a better relationship with them. I think a lot of people, they need time away from social media because they're doing what we were talking about earlier, is they're comparing themselves to other people. They need time away from social media because their time on social media is spent consuming other people's content, judging what other people are doing, comparing themselves to them. And it's like, it's an experience in which they're just getting more and more and more upset on social media based on what other people are doing rather than what they're doing. And it's like that. That's how you lived life. If all you did was walk around in life, judging what everyone else is doing and comparing it back to yourself, you would need a break from life. It would be awful. But that's for whatever reason what people are doing on social media. For me, one of the most powerful concepts that I try to teach my clients, that I try and teach my inner circle members, that I try and teach everyone, that I try and live myself, is that the only way to be as happy as possible. I'm not saying like I'm a happiness expert, because I'm not happy all the time, but I am a very positive, optimistic person. And the best way to have that kind of a life is to take responsibility for what you can control. And if you are finding yourself not happy on social media, that you need a ton of time away from it, then odds are you're not spending your time on social media by doing creating content. You're probably spending too much time consuming content. I spend very little time actually consuming what other people are doing. I spend the vast majority of my time making my own content and interacting with my own audience. And that's why I can enjoy it so much, because it's stuff that I'm creating and actively doing. Now, the usual response to that is, yeah, well, it's easy to say when you have a lot of followers. It's like, go the fuck down my page. You'll see it. There was a period of time where, like years, not a short period. I mean, the vast majority of time where I had maybe 4 likes, 19 likes. I wasn't getting comments. What was I doing then? I was going to other people's pages, seeing the questions people were asking. I would DM those people. I'd say, hey, I saw you had this question. Let me answer it for you. You want to hop on a phone call? I'm happy to have a free consultation with you. I was doing that for years with people. And that slowly and surely started to build up people who trusted me and would reach out to me. I was also doing stuff on my website. I have over 500 articles on there. I have well over 1,000 videos on YouTube by now. It's like people they use an excuse to be able to be like, oh, well, social media burns me out. It makes me feel bad. It's like, no. The way you're using it makes you feel bad. The way that you're consuming others' content and comparing yourself to others is making you feel bad. Social media is an amazing thing. I mean, yesterday, my most popular post was yesterday because I just shared how someone reached out to me saying that they don't have money for groceries, and the Big Mac Challenge has allowed them to be more comfortable having some lower cost food. And then I gave them grocery money for the month, and then they ended up getting a ton of donations from other people on my social media because people wanted to make sure they had money for groceries. It's like, social media isn't bad. It's how you're using it that's bad. And it has way more net positive as long as you're willing to use it for that.
Dude, that's insane. And I read that post, and I think that's why we do the kind of things that we do, especially when you're doing with passion, because you never know exactly what kind of things can impact others and create like life changes, and I think one post, one caption, one thing that you did. And I think we can also like contrast that and, now switching more gears into like the actual nutrition aspect of things specifically. And which is actually like the same thing, is like the way people sometimes like look at dieting and look at nutrition and trying to like lose weight loss, all this, fat loss process is, again, like they try to go into like this kind of faster route and that fast track for that instant gratification, just to find themselves into a point where like they're going to rebound, they're going to go back into their problems, or they're just never going to obviously achieve that. So why don't you kind of like start talking maybe a little bit about this Big Mac Challenge, and what were you trying to, or where are you currently, as the moment that we're recording this podcast, what were you trying to prove or to teach people by doing this? And what was like, I guess like we can probably like define a little bit more about what was a Big Mac challenge? What were the rules that you established for yourself, the duration and all that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll be forthright and say I had no idea it was going to blow up like this. I had no clue people were going to respond the way they're responding, which is another way of going to show you never know what pieces of content are going to do well and what pieces are going to suck. Oftentimes, the ones that I think are going to do really well completely bomb, and the ones that I think are going to suck do really well. Basically, with like, I think one of the most common barriers or obstacles that I have to overcome with clients and inner circle members and people on social media is this fear of quote unquote bad foods. And that deeply rooted and embedded fear creates so many issues, whether it's all the way down to orthorexia nervosa or whether it's like could be anorexia, could be bulimia, could be binge eating disorder. There's so many things that can come from that. And a lot of it will also lead to where probably the biggest issue of all among just people who want to lose weight but struggle with it is consistency. Because people, when they think of the word diet or when they think of eating healthy, they immediately just think like lettuce. They think just like lettuce and water, and they feel restricted. They feel heavy. They feel like, ugh, like they feel like they need an outrageous amount of constant motivation to do it. And so much of what I do, so much of my content is built around lessening that feeling of dread, that lessening that idea that eating healthy has to be lettuce all the time. And in terms of consistency, I found that as soon as people think that they messed up on their diet, they use that idea or that feeling as an excuse to keep messing up. Where they go out for drinks on a Friday night and they have a couple slices of pizza. They're like, oh, I fucked up. And they're like, well, you know what? I completely fucked up. So I'm just going to get back on track on Monday, which means that the entire weekend is spent binging. And then they basically end up at net zero or maybe even a little bit further behind. So they start gaining weight over a period of time because they're eating so much over the weekends. It's just one example. So a lot of my content has been built around saying, listen, you're not screwing up as long as you get right back on track. But you can only say that so many times and say it before you have to come up with new ways to say that. And so I was like, how can I show people this? How can I actually real time show people that they can do that? And I was like, fuck it. I'm going to eat a Big Mac every day for 30 days and show people that you can lose weight while doing that. And that means that just one Big Mac out of your day isn't going to ruin your diet or ruin your progress. And, the reason I chose the Big Mac is because of Super Size Me. And I fucking hate that movie. I really, really hate that movie. And I want to be very clear because some people are like, I can't believe you're speaking so poorly of Morgan Spurlock. I don't know Morgan Spurlock. I respect him immensely for creating such a powerful piece of content that touched people in so many ways. I'm not speaking poorly about him. I'm speaking very poorly about the way that he created this narrative-driven, very biased piece that actually probably created more fear around food than he ever would have realized.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that if he knew how much fear was created out of that and how much maybe possible eating disorders or food anxiety was created, he would probably maybe want to do another experiment at McDonald's, sort of like I'm doing, and see like if it works the same way. There's a lot of very, very biased content in that. And whether it was just because he was saying he had to say yes when they asked him to supersize it, or it was because the main rules was he had to eat at McDonald's. That was it, which means he could have gotten anything he wanted at McDonald's. So, but for some reason, every time he was there, he was getting the extra large Coke. Like you could have gotten the water. That's a choice. Like, you don't have to say you don't have to say yes to the Supersize Me. You don't have to get for me, one of the most common questions I'm getting with the Big Mac challenge is, well, why aren't you getting the fries? Why aren't you getting this? I'm like, because I have a choice to get what the fuck I want to get there. And it's a very powerful thing to tell people that they have a choice. And so I'm showing people I'm getting a Big Mac every single day for 30 days. And I'm going to make a big final wrap up video on YouTube to show everything. And it's like, what else am I eating? I'm eating a very balanced diet. I'm having a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables. I'm eating grilled shrimp. I'm having salmon. I'm having I'm exercising. I'm making sure to walk. That was another thing he did in that film is he literally stopped exercising not only did he stop exercising, he stopped walking. He lives in New York City too. And he deliberately started taking cabs around and more public transit so that he would get his step count down. It's like, what do you think is going to happen if calories go up, fats go up, sodium goes up, all this sugars go up, and you exercise less? Like, it's not like crazy. It's not,
it's not rocket
issue.
Science.
That's a lifestyle issue. And so for me, I was like, I want to basically take the same McDonald's, because a lot of times people see McDonald's, they think supersize me. So I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, I'll take the exact same, that very powerful image, and I'll show you can do the exact opposite as long as your overall lifestyle is in check. And so the main message is you can have your favorite foods in moderation without it taking over your entire life, without losing your progress or ruining your progress. And that's what I'm doing. I'm on day 24 today, and I'm about, like, I don't know, 7 pounds down.
That's crazy, dude. Yeah. And I think, like, what, you know, back to like the documentary, It Super Size Me. I feel like most of it's like, you know, pieces of content that are, you know, and on Netflix or videos like that, they always kind of have an agenda. And of course that they just want to, like, and if you think about it, not just Super Size Me, you look at, for example, the one that they talked a lot about plant-based diets. It makes you want to hate, like, you know, all kinds of meats, and obviously wants to kind of stay away from it. But then you go into like the one that's kind of like the magic pill, and it's about like keto and about low carb and how there's civilizations that actually live off of, like, you know, no carbs. Then it makes you want to, like, go in that route. So dude, it's like, what do you follow? What do you believe in? And because people always like to interpret things based on based on their own values, based on, you know, they just kind of like cherry pick, like, the information that is going to resonate with them the most. And I think obviously that is like the bigger problem. Now for you though, like, I guess, like, what are some of like the craziest type of comments have you gotten? You know, maybe not, I'm not gonna call them the nastiest, but, you know, some people like coming at you saying like, I can't believe you're just kind of pushing that. Did you get a lot of like backlash, you know, for doing this, and, you know, like in the nutrition and fitness and personal training community also?
Well, it's interesting. So at this point, I've gotten over 3,000 messages just on Instagram alone. That doesn't count email or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. Just on Instagram, over 3,000 about the challenge. And of those 3,000, I've had 4 negative responses that I've seen.
Wow.
Yeah, which is amazing. I expected way more. Of those 4 negative responses, I've gotten on the phone with 2 of them. And I've had just interactions back and forth with the other 2 because they weren't willing to get on the phone. Every single time that I've spoken with them, I've said, well, what's the issue? They're like, you're promoting eating Big Macs. You're promoting a bad lifestyle. I'm like, tell me how. And every single time, they have yet to be able to show that I'm promoting that, mainly because the very first video that I made about it, which is still up there, it's all there, is I outright say, the very first one, I am not telling you to eat Big Macs every day. I'm not telling you to eat Big Macs. I'm not telling you Big Macs are nutritious. I'm not telling you to do this. In fact, I'm actively telling you, do not do this challenge, because this challenge is not healthy. That is not what I want you to do. Sometimes you have to do something very extreme in order to get across a simple point. And if it takes me eating a Big Mac every day for 30 days while losing weight, while also having an overall healthy diet and lifestyle in terms of eating a lot of nutritious foods, eating a lot of salads, eating a lot of making sure I'm getting a whole lot of other stuff in there as well. If it takes me doing this to finally show you that you don't have to have food anxiety, that you don't have to be scared of the scale, to like show people this, then I'll absolutely do that. I'll gladly do it. And every single time I've spoken with these people, they were like, honestly, I only looked at a couple of the stories. I saw you eating the Big Macs and I got really emotional about it. And now that I see what else you're doing, like, it makes a lot of sense and I apologize, which I respected immensely, because it takes a lot for someone to actually sort of backtrack and say, yeah, you're right, I apologize. So the vast, like, literally everything has net total been outrageously positive. And I think one of the coolest things for me that I didn't expect, aside from, I mean, man, I've been getting messages you wouldn't believe. Like, I post a lot of them, but there's a lot that I don't post, because there's some very, 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 very personal ones that like I don't think that people would feel comfortable with me sharing. Like, things about like people literally who've been bulimic for the vast majority of their lives, being like, this has come, like, I've been to therapy, I've been to inpatient therapy, like, this has changed my life. People who have severe disordered eating, who have severe food anxiety, being like, nothing has changed my perspective like this. Like this has like, I haven't thrown up in over 2 weeks now. Like, and it's the first time in years. Like, this is like people who were deathly afraid. They wouldn't go to the doctor because they didn't want to step on the scale because the scale created so much fear and anxiety for them. Like, there's the amount of people who have, this has massively impacted them on an emotional and behavioral and psychological level is honestly overwhelming to me. I did not expect it. So the responses to this that I think they're incredible. And it makes me super happy that I'm doing it. And it's making me realize, one of the comments yesterday that I got was, it's one thing to have people who are qualified teaching something and preaching something and lecturing about something on social media. The issue is there's always other people lecturing and teaching and preaching otherwise. There's always someone who says that keto is the best way, and there's always someone else who says that keto isn't the best way. And they're always posting client success stories saying like, well, this, that, and this, that. So you still never know who to believe. It's very different to actually see you do it every day. It's very different to actually see you live what you are preaching. It is very different to see you weigh in every day and to watch the scale, not just go down, but to watch the scale go up and to watch your reaction to the scale going up. It's very different to actually see you doing this. And I was like, what an tremendous teaching tool, and what an amazing opportunity we have as coaches to not just preach, but to actually practice what we preach and put it on display and show people that. Because it's one thing to show a client success story. It's one thing to talk about the science behind it, which they don't give a fuck about anyway. It's another thing to show people real time that this is literally what's happening when you do it the right way.
Yeah. And consistency will always win, man. And I think that it's funny because like I think like 2 weeks ago or like a week ago, I had one of my clients, and I, for in case you didn't know, like, so I do a lot more flexible nutrition, coaching and behavioral type of like, based coaching as well. And one of the things is like one of my clients in Miami, like he's always been, he had a really long history of like, obesity and stuff. And we've been working together for 8 months, and he's just made an amazing, like, just, I believe in like, lifestyle transformation. It's not necessarily just physical, because I feel like physical will come as a result of that. And he's like, I just stopped at McDonald's and I had a Big Mac. And it's funny because I haven't even mentioned anything about like, your challenge and what you were doing. And I asked him, how did you feel? I was like, I felt, it felt liberating and it felt amazing, because I know that I can actually include this as part of my day to day, because I know I'm like making good choices the rest of the day. And I was like, go on Jordan's side and watch like the Big Mac challenge, and you're literally going to be like, yeah, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Because it all comes down to that. It all comes down also to it's like you're saying, like, like the day to day, dude, like, and people don't understand exactly what it takes. And I told this to one of my clients yesterday, you need to develop a good relationship, not only with food, but also a good relationship with the scale. Because like, I think you mentioned it in one of your posts today, like weight is data. Like that is just a point, that is just a data point that just kind of doesn't define you, just basically defines a specific like time point or data point on a day, and how it changes and fluctuates. It depends on many other different factors, right? So like that's a bigger thing, dude.
That I agree 100%, and it's amazing about your client. I love hearing that. It makes me super happy. And I think the scale side of things is probably the side that I didn't anticipate at all. Like, I hadn't really thought much about how people would react to it. And it's one of the greatest victories of the challenge so far, is seeing all of the responses to the scale, because such a common trend in the fitness industry is to just say, the scale makes you feel bad. Don't do it. Don't step on it. I'm like, what in the fuck is wrong? That is like the dumbest advice that you could ever give. If someone is scared of something, if someone has a fear of something, and it doesn't take a doctorate in clinical psychology to understand this, the worst thing that you can do is just say, just ignore it. It's like the worst thing. What you need to do is, number one, educate them on the actual facts about it, so that they can understand the fear around it is irrational, it's emotional, it's not logical. And number two is slowly expose them to it. Is exposure therapy. This is very basic psychology, because when you say, "Oh no, if it makes you feel bad, just don't go on it, ignore it." Number one, then when you will eventually have that back in your life, when you go to the doctor and they weigh you, when it is there, then all of a sudden it creates way more fear. It is a much bigger deal. So, and if you could also extrapolate that to the rest of your life, like, oh, that makes you feel bad, don't do it. Oh, that makes you a little bit worried, don't do it. It's like, if we apply that to all aspects of our life, like, we're going to have a very dangerous life where we just stop doing anything that possibly makes us uncomfortable. You know what? Eating fruits and vegetables, like, it makes you like, gives you a little bit of anxiety. You know, don't do it. Let's say it's hard to do that. Don't do it. Just eat whatever you want. It's a very dangerous road to go down. But the whole idea around the scale is just being data. It's like, literally, I've got probably over 20 messages just this morning from the post I put up like an hour or so ago, being like, that just those two words, it's data, changed my mindset around it. It's like teaching people that your weight will fluctuate. It's going to fluctuate. It has so many things to do with far outside of fat gain or fat loss. One of my most popular videos on YouTube is showing people the 3 most common fluctuation patterns I've seen in the scale. And that comes from working with literally thousands of people over the years, and not just working with them, but tracking their daily weigh-ins. I have thousands of graphs of people's daily weigh-ins for bare minimum 6 months. That's like the shortest amount of time I would ever work with someone, all the way up to 5 years. And you can see these 3 most common weight trends over and over and over. I've never seen anybody else talk about this. I've never seen this in the literature. I've never seen any other coaches talk about this. To my knowledge, I'm the only one who's meticulously tracked that many people's weights over the years. And these trends are very real. Like, they are very, very, very real. And it's one of my most popular YouTube videos, because it shows people you can almost predict when your weight is going to spike up, when your weight is going to drop, when you're going to have like a flatline plateau. And for me, that knowledge will allow people to stop freaking out when the scale spikes up, stop thinking they're ruining their progress, and allow them to say, okay, this is normal. Maybe I can feel a bit more bloated. Maybe I'm leading up to my menstrual cycle. Maybe I had more salt yesterday. Maybe this is just the trend that I have. And again, when you stop thinking that you messed up and start realizing it's just part of the process, you can stay more consistent. And as we always say, consistency is king.
Yeah, dude. One question of those weight fluctuations, because I think this is like extremely valuable information for people listening that are always, scared when they step on the scale after like maybe like on a Monday, and they're like, holy fuck, like I'm up like 4 pounds from the weekend. Like, I had a client that went on a bachelor party and he was like 10 pounds above, and I was like, he was freaking out and called me, and I'm like, dude, chill out. Like, give it 4 days, and I guarantee you didn't gain 10 pounds of fat in 2 days. Like, that's just, I think, like, it's just impossible. So like, he called me like 4 days later, and he's like, the weight is back to the same thing. And I know for you, when you did this Big Mac challenge, there's also those spikes, and you can kind of see that in the graph. And you also talked about what we call like, the swoosh effect, I think it's called. Can you kind of elaborate on like maybe what those spikes maybe relate to in that swoosh effect? Because some people actually ask me, I was like, what the fuck is the swoosh effect?
Dude, so it's really interesting. And I know there are some more scientific literature-based articles on the whoosh effect and why it happens. Basically, here's what I can tell you. And
yeah, basically what you know.
Based on what I know, and I always want to be forth. Like, if I know the science of something, I will say, "Hey, here's the science." I don't fully understand the science behind why. Like, and I don't want to pretend that I do. So it's really important. But I can tell you that you could look at my weight over this Big Mac challenge, and I can show you thousands of graphs with other people who have done it with me. Like, it's very real, and I can tell you what I would imagine it is based on my knowledge of physiology. Basically, what I've noticed is that as people are losing fat, they'll start losing weight initially, and then they'll hit what people call the plateau, where they're not making any progress. And even though they're doing everything right and I'm just not losing weight, it's like, listen, you're not going to lose every day or every week. That's not how it fucking works. You know that. If you lost a pound every single week for a year, you'd lose 52 pounds. In 2 years, it'd be 104 pounds. Like, this is not realistic or sustainable in how the body works. Like, it's just not, like, it's not a static system. So there's going to be periods of time where it goes up, where it goes down, blah, blah, blah. Basically, what I've noticed there, when you have that sort of a flatline time period, which could be 2 days, it could be a week, the longest period of time I've seen someone have a flatline period, keeping calories the same, activity the same, was literally just over a month. And I was like, we're not changing anything. Like, I want to go as long as we can before we need to reduce calories or increase activity. So it was just over a month. That was the longest period of time. And they were like, I only did it with a client that I knew that would do anything I said and trusted me implicitly, because other people might have said fuck it and done other things. Most of the times it usually lasts between like 2 days up to 2 weeks. And within that 2 week time frame, you'll get a whoosh. But leading up to that time, you'll literally start to feel water, like more water accumulate between your skin and your muscle, like especially in your abdomen. Sometimes you'll start to feel a little bit puffy. You'll start to feel just like you won't see as much muscle definition. You'll look a little bit squishy. I believe Lyle McDonald has an article on it called "Whooshes and Squishy Fat," and like that's sort of what he was referring to there. And then usually what'll happen is, like, on one random morning, you'll wake up, you'll go, and you'll have peed a lot, and all of a sudden you'll have dropped like up to several pounds. Like, it could be 1 pound, it could be 3 pounds. I've seen up to like 4 pounds at once, but like just out of nowhere, just a huge drop. And then that's when a lot of times the cells release the water, and then it just flushes right out of you. And again, I'm not saying like, well, I have a bunch of randomized controlled trials that show this. Like, I don't. That's just my knowledge with working with thousands of people and seeing that trend over and over and over again. And like even seeing it during this Big Mac challenge as well.
Yeah. And I think it happens, man. And then but most people don't understand that 70 to 80% of their body's water, and the mind is like the simplest. Like, I mean, that's it, for a 200-pound person, that's like a good amount, like 140, 150 pounds of like just water or just like fluid that you have in your body. And there's minor fluctuations to that. You're going to obviously have fluctuations in your weight, of course. And I think people just sometimes like they just like to see like weight as like it's either fat or no fat. Like, they don't even look at muscle mass. Like, they don't even look at any of those kind of like areas, and they just kind of like dead set focus on just fat. And I think that's obviously the biggest misconception. And I believe like your Big Mac challenge has definitely proven that, it's not just about that. And that's exciting. I'm curious, do you track macros? Do you do like, track your calories and intake, like especially throughout this entire period of time? Or like, how do you ensure that you're kind of creating that calorie deficit?
It's really funny. I'm going to go back to one thing really quick, because it's an important point, and then I'll answer that question.
Yeah.
In terms of weight, it's so funny. People talk about, even the people who know what they're talking about, they'll talk about whether it's like water, they'll talk about sodium, they'll talk about carbs. I think the thing that most people never talk about is bone density. And you get this a lot with people who've started lifting weights. And I don't mean lifting weights in the last week or last month. I mean, people have been lifting weights for maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years. And they're like, I just can't get back down to what I weighed before. I'm like, have you been strength training? Yeah, I can deadlift like 200 more pounds. I was like, do you realize that you're literally adding bone to your frame? Like, you're changing your physiology. It's to want to get back down to the weight that you were at doesn't make sense unless you also want to lose the bone density that you've already added. Like, there's other factors here. Like, over my time in college, I added over 4 pounds of bone to my frame because I was powerlifting, because I was lifting a fuck ton. It's like, and as a 5'4", I was competing at 132 pounds. That's a lot of weight. That's a huge percentage of weight that now I have to cut elsewhere, whether it's from fat or from water when I weigh in for competition. It's like, there's a lot of factors going on here that we really need to pay attention to. But anyway, so in terms of the question about tracking my calories or macros, personally, I've never tracked carbs or fats ever. Like, I've always just been calories, protein, that's it. Mainly because I suck at math. I am awful. I hate math. I'm really bad with numbers. And when I started learning all this stuff, and it was like, oh my God, calories, protein, carbs, fats, like, we have to manipulate all of it and make sure we hit the right numbers. I was like, well, fuck it. I'm not going to do any of it. But then when I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start with calories. Like, calories are number one. I'm going to do that. And then just one set of numbers, easy. Then from there, I knew that protein was the most important from muscle mass perspective, from a satiety perspective, from all that stuff. So I was like, you know what? I'm only going to do calories and protein. And that's worked outrageously well. If I was working with a higher level athlete who like really needed to be more aware of their carb and fat intake, like, I would have them do that. But personally, for me and for my clients and our circle members, no, I don't do that at all. And for this, I've tracked my calories so much over my lifetime that I don't need to count them anymore in order to have an idea of how much I'm eating, especially because I tend to eat more or less a very similar diet on a regular basis anyway. And I think this is where a lot of the intuitive eating crowd they're like, oh, you shouldn't count calories. You should just intuitively eat. It's like, you can't intuitively eat until you fucking know how much you're eating. It's like, if you tell someone who literally like is subsisting off a diet of a lot of fast food or fucking Sour Patch Kids or candies, or they don't have a quote unquote healthy diet, you just tell them to eat intuitively. Like, cool, I'll intuitively go to Papa John's and get a large pepperoni pizza. Like, what the fuck do you think? Like, you have to teach people how much they're eating before they can be intuitive with it. So I could just come up here and say, yeah, I eat intuitively. It's like, no. My intuitive eating is based off of over a decade of understanding how many calories I'm eating, how many calories are in food, how much protein is in food, knowing what foods make me feel good, knowing what foods fill me up more. So like, I didn't meticulously track my calories, but I could probably tell you within 50 to 100 calories every day where I was.
That's interesting. And I guess like what message on this specific topic would you tell somebody that, like they come to you, especially your clients that come to you and tell you like, Jordan, dude, I've been doing exactly what you told me and I've been tracking my calories and nothing is happening. And you and I both know that obviously there's something that is happening that obviously is not as accurate as what you're reflecting. Do you encounter that a lot? And do you feel it's associated because of the lack of education of understanding what's on your plate? Or is it more because of like people are just afraid to actually tell you the truth of what's going on?
So it's a wonderful question, and I think there are many different possibilities. So number one is I think when a lot of people are either misreport or underreporting or not reporting accurately, I think the vast majority of them are doing it from a place of believing that they aren't actually that they are actually eating the right amount. They truly believe. They're not lying deliberately. I think they just don't know. And this actually shows itself in the literature like very clearly. The people who struggle to lose weight consistently underreport how much they're eating. And people who struggle to gain weight consistently overreport. And it's not because they're lying. It's just they actually think they're eating more or less than what they're eating. But that being said, there are some things I'll do. So number one is I'll try and educate them as much as possible on sneaky calories, things that like licks, bites, and taste, things like that. And then basically, because a lot of times people start counting their calories, but I'll never forget, I had a client, his name is Jerry, still a client. He had lost some weight initially, then his weight plateaued, and he should have been losing more. And he's like, he's from Boston. He's a Boston guy too. He's one of my first online coaching clients. And he was like, man, I don't know what the fuck is going on. I'm following all your fucking calories, all this other stuff. And, and for 2 weeks, his weight didn't drop. And I was like, okay, it should have dropped a little bit by now. And so I was like, tell me what you're eating, like everything, literally everything that's going in your mouth. I want to know. And I saw in his log that he was having 3 large coffees from Dunkin' Donuts every day. I was like, are these black? He was like, no, I get it with cream. I was like, are you counting the cream in that coffee towards your calories? He was like, no. I was like, Jesus, that's probably close to an extra 1,000 calories worth of cream, just because that's 3 large coffees with heavy cream. Like, that's a fuck ton. As soon as he started counting those, boom, his weight started dropping. So a lot of times, whether it's sneaky calories like that or licks, bites, and peel, like parents taking a little bit of food here and there off their children's plate, grabbing snacks, a handful of nuts, there are those things. Another thing I'll do is I'll have clients send me pictures of their food. Just like, hey, for the next 3 days, send me a picture of everything you're eating. I just did this the other day with a client. And she was having a lot of avocado, but she would always say, yeah, just like 1 serving, whatever. And I was like, okay, I feel like there's probably some misreporting. This happens with peanut butter a lot too. And so she sent me pictures, and I looked at the plate. I was like, there's no way that's like 100 calories worth of, like, in my head. I was like, absolutely not. So I said, hey, just out of curiosity, are you using a food scale, or are you using more of like a just eyeballing approach? She was like, I'm mostly just eyeballing it. I was like, I want you to weigh the avocado and tell me how much, and like then send me the picture of the new portion size. And she was like, oh my God. Like, she was having like triple the portion size of avocado several times a day, that's going to seriously impact it. Then there's another option as well that I see very frequently, in which people are like adamant, like, no, I'm tracking every single thing. I'm being super, like, I'm not messing up. I promise you. And no matter what, like they take pictures of their food and it all looks perfect, but there's something clearly not right. So what I've realized, and this is like a really good strategy in terms of motivational interviewing and speaking with your clients, is I'll say, because people know what they're doing, even if they're not admitting it. And so I'll frame a question like this. If you had to look at your diet and pick one area that might be contributing to this stall or not making progress, if you had to pick one, what would it be? And basically it puts them in a position where like they have to choose the one area where they might not be doing as well as they say they're doing. And the most common one I hear is weekends. Well, on weekends, sometimes I'll go out and, I might not track everything, but I'm usually good with it, but I might not. I'm like, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to have this one weekend where you track everything, literally everything, just this one weekend. And then let's see what happens. And lo and behold, like 9.9 times out of 10, it's like, oh, fuck, I didn't realize how much I was eating. I'm so sorry. It's like the vast majority of time, it's usually one of those three options I just outlined where people are not deliberately lying to you. They're not aware of what's going on. And it's important. Like you can only know this from experience coaching so many different people and having these different options crop up. Another common one that I get with people who aren't clients, but people who swear they're eating the right amount of calories is I'm like, are you tracking? I'm tracking everything. I'm tracking everything. And I used to say, are you weighing your food? And then they would lie sometimes. They'd be like, yeah, I am weighing it. But sort of bypass that possible lie, I'd say, which food scale are you using? And then from there, they would be like, they can't say, well, they're not just going to make one up. They're like, oh, I'm not using a food scale. I'm like, oh, so you need to use a food scale because I guarantee you're underestimating how much you're eating. And then they'll come back to me 2 weeks later. Holy shit, I didn't know what a portion size looked like. So these are all just certain examples of people not being aware of actually how much they're eating, which we know, like coaches, nutritionists, dietitians, like we know people aren't aware, but most people aren't aware of that. And like, this is different ways to teach them.
And I think a lot of times, like they go and they when they don't really create awareness around all these kinds of things, then they start blaming it on other things, such as like it's my hormones, and my hormones are fucked up and jacked up, and there's like there's a reason I might have a thyroid problem, and then they start to go and then spending all this thousands of dollars and all this tests to try to understand what is going on with them when in reality there isn't anything wrong with them. I literally do have like a client in New York City, actually, who's spent thousands of dollars in test after test before she started working with me, trying to figure out what's wrong with her. Nothing in her hormones wrong with her. Her blood sugar is perfect. Like everything is perfect, yet she still kind of struggles. But then obviously, like the part of like, the weekends resonated with me because again, that's like, this is like a CEO of a company, like, and then the weekends started like the times like for her to like let go. And I'm not from New York City. I don't know what life is like that. But from what I understand, it's a pretty hectic, super fast paced lifestyle. So, of course, like the emotional type of eating, I think is going to take a place in there as well. Right. So,
yeah, 100%, man. Absolutely. And I just did on my podcast, I interview clients and inner circle members just to answer their questions or get like their stories out to people. And the woman that I spoke with yesterday was a client for about 6 months, and forever she could not lose weight. She couldn't lose weight. And like she does have Hashimoto's, but like nothing was working. And finally, like she ended up coming to me, and she even said, she was like, when I first went to you, I thought that it was going to be bullshit. I was like, I didn't think it was going to work, but I stuck with it. And like, what do you know? Like I was eating way more than I thought. And she was one of the people who was eating very quote unquote healthy. Like she has a gluten intolerance. So she was eating gluten free, and she has Hashimoto's. So things were very limited as is, but she was eating a fuck ton more than she thought, just like most people. And it literally just comes down to finding the right way to educate the individual to help them know that like what an appropriate portion size looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that happens all the time because they just, again, they just don't create enough awareness. Well, dude, that's awesome, man. Like I definitely want to also be respectful of your time. So like, I have one more last question for you that I wanted to ask you just to kind of like wrap it up before we kind of jump into some rapid fire questions. But what would like today's Jordan Syatt would tell the younger version of you? Let's say like, looking back, I don't know, how old are you right now?
28.
So let's say like, like your 22-year-old self, as you were starting this journey as an online nutrition coach or, fitness coach, what would be like, the top 3 things that you would tell that younger version that you wish you would have done differently?
As a coach, from a coaching perspective?
Yeah, from the coaching perspective.
Man, I would say, that's a good question. I would say number 1 would be talk less and listen more, which is very cliche. But I say that because most people think they're very good listeners, and in reality, they suck. Like most coaches are much more just like, they just want to tell them what to do. They want to tell them what to do. They want to tell them what to do. And I know I was like this when I was younger. I was just like, well, just do this. Just do this. Like, yeah. Okay, cool. But do this. It's like, shut the fuck up and let them talk. Not even because like, if for anything else, like it's therapeutic and sometimes they'll come up with the answer on their own, which is way more powerful than you giving them the answer. I would say number 2 is, let me see, as talk less, listen more. I would say, okay, here's a good one. I know a lot of coaches, including myself a long time ago, I used to say, my job isn't to motivate you. My job is to give you the plan and your job is to follow it. That's a really fucking awful way to go about it. And the example that I use here is, think about your favorite high school teacher, your favorite middle school teacher, your favorite college professor. Guarantee you can think of one that really sticks out in your head, and guarantee you that one person probably spent more time with you before school, after school, during class or whatever. They spent extra time with you to help you in whatever you needed, give you support in some way that went far above and beyond what the job description was. And for me as a coach, I'm like, listen, if you want to just be another coach that when someone's 90 years old, they don't remember your name, they don't even really remember you, then fine, don't motivate your clients. But if you want to be the person when someone's 90 years old, 95 years old, and they're telling their grandkids, the person who changed their life, the coach who really went above and beyond and completely changed their life and allowed them to live a long, healthy, happy life. If you want to be that coach, then damn fucking right, it's your job to help motivate your clients so they can stay more consistent and you can be there for their accountability and help them succeed. And then for the last one, I would say don't underestimate the value of saying you don't know and or you were wrong. I think I definitely struggled with this for a long time, and a lot of coaches I still do, is where they couldn't possibly fathom the idea of telling a client or telling people on social media that they made a mistake or they were wrong or they don't know. And what I found is when I've made a mistake or when I'm wrong or when I don't know and I say it openly and honestly, people respect me much more and they trust me much more. I did it this morning. Yesterday, I predicted the scale was going to spike up because I thought it was just based on the pattern. I ended up continuing to pee an outrageous amount. It was coming back from the wedding and like I released a lot of water. I had another little whoosh and I was like, yesterday I predicted it would go up today. It didn't. I was wrong. Here's why. And people are like, holy shit. Like just the fact that you said you're wrong makes me trust you. Like literally, I trust you more because you said you were wrong rather than trying to come up with an excuse or ignore it. Like people really will trust you when you're more honest, like obviously, but that goes not just for telling the truth when it works in your favor, but for also when you made a mistake.
Yeah, because you're human and people can see that.
Exactly.
So people can make mistakes. So yeah, those are powerful, man. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this, specifically dietitians and coaches, that sometimes because especially us, as an RD, like we have all this nutrition education background and all kinds of stuff like that. So when somebody asks us a question like, oh, what do you think about caffeine? And we don't know anything about caffeine. Like I'm like, when you're going to start to come up with some weird answer that, makes absolutely no fucking sense. And then obviously that's going to be worse on you because eventually the truth is going to come out. So I think that's pretty powerful. Well, dude, we come to the end of the podcast and I appreciate your time. I wanted to ask you just to kind of wrap it up, some rapid fire questions was the first thing that comes to your mind as I ask it. You ready for it?
Let's do it.
Awesome. First question would be, what is your favorite exercise that you like to do?
Deadlift.
Sweet. Love that. Second question would be, what is a book that everybody should have on their bookshelf or that you would gift to somebody?
The entire Harry Potter series.
That's a great one, dude. Yeah, I think I read somewhere that you were a fan of Harry Potter. Sweet. What is a podcast or obviously YouTube channel, and of course you can talk about your own, that you would recommend people to watch? You feel like people would find valuable content and to learn from the nutrition perspective?
Obviously, I'm going to say my own for sure, just in terms of especially the psychological and behavior aspect of things. I don't really talk with other professionals. I speak with clients and I interview clients and to either help them work through their problems or discuss what helped them along their process. So definitely for that, either my YouTube or my podcast. And then someone else. I mean, the issue with that is, like I said it earlier, I don't really consume content. I don't. And I'm not like saying that to sound superior. Like I would way rather spend my time making content than consuming it. So I really don't really listen to anyone else's podcast or YouTube. I know, I will say from a lifting perspective, I really do like Omar Isuf. I think his lifting stuff is great, and Squat University, they have some really good stuff as well. I know, like nutrition wise, I think probably my greatest resource is Alan Aragon's research review. It's $10 a month, and it's like just unbelievably tremendous work that really gives you the best up-to-date insight on new research, but that's pretty much it.
Yep, I have that, so that's pretty good. Last question would be, if you were stranded on a desert island for the rest of your life and you were to choose only one food to survive with until the end of existence, what would that be?
Pizza. Pepperoni pizza.
Oh yeah, that New York pizza, man.
Oh my God, it's so good.
That is awesome, man. Well, thank you, Jordan, so much for your time, man. How can people, what's like, of course you're like everywhere in social media, but what is like the best way people can reach out to you, find out about you, and what do you got going on right now?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing I'm currently working on is my YouTube, just really putting a lot of effort into that, like longer form content, like the most informational. So Jordan Syatt on YouTube, Syatt Fitness on Instagram. My podcast is the Jordan Syatt Mini Podcast. And you just Google my name, Jordan Syatt, Syatt, then you will find everything you need to know.
Awesome. And then if you guys are listening to this and you have not had a chance to watch Jordan's like Big Mac Challenge, I highly suggest you go through his stories and then watch some of his YouTube channels, some of his YouTube videos on, his whole entire experience. And by the time that this releases, which is going to be closer, like I think right now it's going to be closer to end of October, November, then he will already have finished and then have all like the content available for you to be able to like listen and watch, of course. So Jordan, dude, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time here today, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Vive Nutrition Radio. I wanted to ask you a quick favor. If you enjoyed this episode or if you're enjoying the podcast altogether, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review so we increase our visibility and we continue to reach more people and change their lifestyle through nutrition, performance, fitness, and health. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys on the next one.